At 1:50 a.m., I opened our Ring camera and saw my fiancée riding a guy on my living room couch. She moaned, "He never comes home this early." I walked in 2 minutes later, and I checked the Ring camera at 1:50 a.m. because the driver who was supposed to drop off my coworker kept calling the wrong number. That tiny mistake pulled up a screen I had never expected to see. My living room lights glowed softly, and the couch sat in clear view. In the center of the frame, my fiancée, Brianna, was riding a man I had never met. She tossed her head back and laughed that I never came home this early. She sounded casual, almost relaxed, as if this had become part of a hidden routine she trusted would stay private forever. I was 2 minutes away. My pulse didn't spike. It didn't sink either. Everything simply narrowed into a single, steady path. Walk inside, and in the fantasy she had been treating as a secret playground. I pulled into my complex, parked crooked, and pushed through the front door without pausing to gather myself. Brianna had no idea I was already inside the building. She thought I was across town. She thought the night belonged to her. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Silence dropped so fast it felt physical. Brianna froze mid-motion and scrambled downward, trying to cover herself with a blanket that slipped off the couch. The man, who I would later know as Scott, jolted upright like someone caught in a spotlight. He reached for his shirt, but couldn't decide whether to put it on or hide behind it. The air smelled like cheap wine, sweat, and something burned in the kitchen. A pan sat on the stove with charred edges, suggesting they had tried to make food before getting distracted. I stepped forward because waiting felt pointless. They did not deserve the courtesy of hesitation. Brianna kept stammering, trying to piece together an excuse, but Scott cut her off without meaning to. He said she told him I moved out after a fight last night. She had apparently spun a whole story about a breakup and presented the home as hers alone. His voice trembled because he realized the lie in real time. He looked at me while trying to understand what kind of web she had pulled him into. The shock on his face did nothing for me. Brianna's shock did even less. I felt a strange clarity instead. She had built a private world with rehearsed narratives, and she thought she could keep adjusting them to whatever she needed. I wasn't supposed to walk in. I wasn't supposed to know. She had planned the night with confidence that I would stay in my predictable routine, like someone who believed she already mapped out my entire life. She reached toward me, but I stepped back because I didn't want her anywhere near me. Scott moved aside, ready to leave, but the scene had already drawn attention. A knock sounded at the door. When I opened it halfway, my neighbor Denise stood in her robe, holding her phone like she considered calling security. She scanned the room and looked immediately irritated. She asked if I was finally addressing the situation because she had seen that guy around the building more than once. She pointed down the hallway and said she had noticed him arriving late on several nights when she assumed Brianna was hosting friends. That sentence felt like someone pulled the floor from under the entire month. I hadn't suspected anything. I had trusted every explanation about working late, needing space, being tired. All of it now sounded like rehearsed lines designed to push me out of the house whenever she needed privacy. Brianna panicked when Denise spoke. She tried to shut the door in her face, but Denise held her ground and kept talking. She said she kept quiet because she didn't want to assume the worst, but the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Brianna raised her voice and demanded she leave. Denise refused and said the noise tonight was too loud to ignore. She turned back to me and said she was sorry I had to learn this way. The entire hallway stood in silence for a moment. Even Scott stopped moving. I looked at Brianna. She kept darting between me and Denise, desperate to regain control. She tried shifting blame onto everyone else. She tried claiming she was lonely. She tried saying I never listened. Everything she said collapsed instantly under its own weight because the truth sat in the center of the room, half-dressed and trying to pick up his shoes. The energy shifted again when Scott finally spoke in a small voice. He said he didn't want to be part of anything like this, and he didn't know she was engaged. He apologized to me while Brianna kept telling him not to talk. He pulled on his pants and grabbed his shoes without tying them. The door stayed open because Denise refused to move until I closed it myself. She watched the entire breakup unfold like someone witnessing a building fire through a window. She didn't enjoy it, but she wasn't willing to walk away either. She had been living next door to chaos without knowing whether she should intervene. Tonight answered that. I told Scott to leave. He walked past Denise, muttering something about being misled. His face looked drained, like he had just walked off a cliff without realizing the ground beneath him wasn't solid. Once he left, silence hit harder than the confrontation. Brianna fell into the usual cycle of self-preservation. She begged. She insisted she wasn't happy. She argued that she needed excitement. She tried to reach toward me again. Every attempt only revealed more of the life she had been building behind my back. I grabbed my keys and stepped into the hallway because standing in that room felt like breathing in smoke. Denise stood a few steps away and asked if I wanted her to stay nearby for safety. Her voice was soft now, not confrontational, like she had switched from witness to concerned neighbor. I thanked her and said I was leaving for the night. As I walked down the hallway, Brianna followed, crying loudly enough to wake another neighbor. Denise stepped in front of her and told her to let me leave. That was the moment Brianna finally stopped. She stood in the doorway, staring at me with a look that mixed confusion, fear, and disbelief that her entire plan had fallen apart in minutes. The elevator ride down felt like stepping out of a different version of my life. My phone buzzed nonstop with her messages, but I ignored them. I walked to my car with an odd sense of steadiness. It wasn't calm. It wasn't numbness. It was simply the understanding that everything from this moment forward would be built on truth, not whatever story she wanted me to believe. That was only the beginning. I slept in my car for a few hours because going to a hotel felt pointless. My mind churned through every angle of what happened, yet the more I tried to make sense of it, the less any explanation felt real. When daylight finally pushed through the windshield, I drove to a diner and sat in a corner booth. I didn't order anything. I stared at the menu until the letters blurred, unable to shake the image of my fiancée, treating my home as a stage for a life she built without me. By mid-morning, I knew I had to confront the practical part of the disaster. Everything we shared, accounts, bills, obligations, suddenly felt like exposed wires sparking on a wet floor. I logged into our joint account from my phone. The first transaction wasn't shocking. It was groceries. The second was normal too. But then I scrolled down and saw a transfer to a man named Carl. Then another. Then more. Always spaced a week or two apart. Always round numbers. Always unexplained. I stared at the screen longer than I intended. My hands felt heavier, as if I was holding a device that carried more weight than a simple bank app. The amounts weren't catastrophic, but they weren't small either. They went back months. Long before any tension between us. Long before she claimed she needed space. Long before she started pushing me toward night shifts. I closed the app because I needed clarity from someone outside the situation. So I called my friend Felix. He heard the strain in my voice before I even finished saying hello. He asked if he should meet me or if I wanted to talk over the phone. I didn't trust myself to speak clearly, so I drove to his apartment. He opened the door with the look of someone braced for bad news. I told him everything as plainly as possible. Ring footage. The confrontation. Scott. The hallway. The neighbors. The transfers to Carl. Felix listened without interrupting, which made it easier to keep talking. When I finally stopped, he took a breath and told me something I hadn't expected to hear. He said months ago he overheard Brianna talking at a gathering. She told someone she felt uncertain about the engagement because she didn't believe my career would advance quickly enough. She claimed she stayed because I was steady, not because she was in love. Felix didn't tell me at the time because he thought she was venting. People complained during stress. He never imagined it was a warning sign of something deeper. Now he wasn't so sure. That sentence stung, not because Felix meant harm, but because it fit too neatly with everything unraveling. Her absence, her excuses, her sudden insistence that I work later shifts, her new wardrobe, the way she brushed off intimacy. All of it lined up like a puzzle I had ignored because I trusted her. I thanked him for being honest. I told him I needed to speak to Brianna again, not for reconciliation, but for clarity. I didn't want any unanswered questions dragging behind me for years. He offered to come with me, but I refused. This was a mess I needed to walk into alone. When I reached our apartment building, the hallway felt colder. Denise's door was slightly open. She watched me pass, not intrusively, but with quiet concern. She didn't speak. She didn't intervene. She just nodded once, a subtle sign that she was aware of the ongoing storm. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Brianna sat on the couch, staring at the floor with folded hands like someone waiting for a verdict. When she saw me, she rushed forward, talking quickly, begging me to sit. I remained standing. She tried reaching for me again. I stepped away. Before she could start spinning anything, I asked about the transfers. Her face drained instantly. She tried claiming they were for a group trip that fell apart. She then shifted to saying she loaned money to a coworker. Neither explanation matched the dates or the amounts, and she knew it. When she realized I wasn't accepting anything vague, she finally admitted it. She said Carl wasn't a coworker. He was someone she owed money to after a mistake months ago. She didn't want to tell me because she feared it would make her look irresponsible. She took out a loan she wasn't supposed to take and panicked when the payments increased. Instead of being honest, she dipped into our account and hoped she could fix everything before I noticed. My stomach tightened because her story still didn't track. I asked what mistake she made, but she wouldn't answer. She kept insisting it wasn't dangerous. She said she just needed time. She said she planned to repay everything. I didn't trust any part of it. Not after the night I walked in on. Before she could backtrack or redirect, the front door opened. Scott stepped inside. He froze when he saw me. Brianna spun toward him in shock. She claimed she told him not to come. He said she texted him earlier asking if he could drive her to pick up some things. He apologized again for everything and said he needed to hear from her why she lied to him too. The room tilted because suddenly her stories collapsed on themselves. She had told him I moved out. She had told me the relationship was stable. She had told Felix she was unsure about me. She had told Carl something else entirely. Now all three of us stood in the same room, watching her scramble to maintain control over a web she couldn't patch together anymore. Her voice rose as she tried to defend herself. She insisted she hadn't meant harm. She said she was overwhelmed. She tried crying. She tried shifting blame. Scott's expression hardened with confusion and frustration. He wasn't the villain I expected. He was another person she managed with a separate storyline. He asked her if she loved him. She couldn't answer. She asked me if we could still fix things. I couldn't answer. Then she pointed at both of us and said she made mistakes because she was scared of losing security on one side and losing passion on the other. That moment hit harder than the ring footage. Not because it hurt more, but because it clarified everything. She didn't just cheat. She built two separate futures and tried to keep both within reach until she decided which one benefited her more. I walked out because there was nothing left to salvage in that room. As I reached the hallway, Denise stood outside again, startled by the raised voices. She didn't ask questions. She simply said she hoped I would take care of myself. I thanked her, genuinely, because sometimes strangers understand situations better than people you thought you knew intimately. I stepped outside into the afternoon sun. The world felt brighter than it should have. My phone buzzed repeatedly, but I ignored it. I knew the next round of chaos wasn't finished. This was only the middle layer. Something deeper still waited beneath her half-truths. And it would surface soon. I spent the night at Felix's place because going back to the apartment felt like walking into smoke from a fire that was still burning. He didn't ask questions. He handed me a blanket and let me sleep on the couch, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brianna standing between me and Scott, trying to shape the story so neither of us abandoned her first. By morning, news had already spread farther than I expected. When I turned my phone back on, notifications poured in from her family members. Some messages demanded I explain myself. Others insisted Brianna was devastated. One even accused me of abandoning her in a moment of weakness. She had been busy rewriting the entire situation while I was trying to process it. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I decided to handle the practical fallout. The lease was under both our names. The utilities were under mine. Our shared account needed to be frozen. I didn't want more surprises. I drove to the apartment building, and as soon as I stepped into the lobby, I saw Mira, the landlord's assistant, sorting paperwork behind the desk. She looked up with recognition because she had handled our move-in process. She stepped around the counter and asked if everything was all right because the building's security system flagged noise complaints from my floor the night before. Normally, I would have lied and brushed it off. Not this time. I told her Brianna and I were separating, and I needed to know the process for removing myself from the lease. She paused. Then she asked if Brianna could afford the full rent alone. I said I had no idea. Mira frowned and said she would check her application information again. She pulled up the file and stared at the screen longer than seemed normal. She asked me to confirm Brianna's income. The number she had on paper looked wrong. Much higher. Suspiciously higher. I told her Brianna never made that amount. Myra's mouth tightened. She walked back around the counter and said the additional income listed on Brianna's application came from a letter of employment supposedly issued by her workplace. Mira said she remembered processing it and thinking Brianna was lucky to land such a role right before we moved in. I told her the document must be fake. Mira blinked slowly, absorbing that. Then she said the lease could not remain active if one of the income sources had been falsified. She would need to document it and escalate the issue. I thanked her for being straightforward because the last thing I needed was another hidden mess. When I left the lobby, Denise was standing outside the elevator doors. She looked hesitant, almost apologetic, which was new for her. She said she wasn't trying to meddle, but she thought I should know something. She held up her phone and asked if she should send me a video. I asked what kind of video it was. She said she recorded something last night after I left because she heard Brianna in the courtyard talking loudly on the phone. I told her to send it. She forwarded the file and walked back to her apartment without explaining anything further. I opened the video immediately. The footage showed Brianna pacing back and forth outside the building, ranting into her phone. She wasn't crying. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't devastated. She was angry. She told someone she didn't want the relationship anymore, but needed it long enough to get her finances settled. She said Scott was supposed to replace me once his promotion became permanent. She complained that everything fell apart because I came home earlier than expected. The ground didn't shift this time. It shattered. Because for the first time, I realized her cheating wasn't the main betrayal. Her entire engagement had been structured around safety nets. She treated love like a contingency plan. She used my routine as a predictable backdrop for a double life she felt entitled to maintain. I walked upstairs because I needed closure, not hope. I needed to hear her speak without filters or excuses. When I stepped into the apartment, Brianna was on the phone arguing with her sister. She hung up immediately when she saw me. Her expression lit up like she believed I came back to negotiate. She started apologizing again, spinning new angles, rewriting motivations, reshaping everything to sound reasonable. I didn't sit. I didn't soften. I told her I saw the video. Her entire face stiffened. She asked which video. I told her the courtyard recording. I told her Denise heard everything. I told her her own words had exposed her better than any confrontation could. She swallowed hard. Then she started speaking with a completely different tone. No tears. No pleading. No confusion. Just calculation. She said she never meant to hurt me. She said she panicked during a stressful year. She said she needed stability. She said she needed options. She said she didn't want to end up struggling like her parents. She said the engagement wasn't fake, but her feelings became mixed when Scott entered her life. She said she didn't know how to choose. She said she assumed she could delay the decision until she felt certain. Every sentence made the room feel smaller. Then the twist hit in a way I didn't anticipate. She said she had already told her family that I had been distant for months and that our relationship was failing long before the cheating. She told them she had tried to fix things. She told them she had been miserable. She said she framed it that way because she didn't want to be judged for falling for someone else. That explained the messages earlier. She had prepared a narrative where I pushed her away, where she tried her best, where I failed her, where my early return became an unfortunate coincidence, turning her moment of confusion into an exposed mistake instead of a planned transition. Before I could respond, the front door swung open again. Scott stepped inside, holding something in his hands. A notebook. He looked furious. He said he found it in his car. She must have left it there by accident. He opened it to a page filled with lists. Pros and cons financial details. Notes about which man could support her long-term. Potential plans depending on who committed first. And at the bottom, a timeline that suggested she planned to leave me officially in 3 months. She lunged for the notebook. He pulled it back. I stood still because no argument could compete with what was written in that stack of pages. She tried denying it. She tried calling it brain dumping. She tried saying it wasn't serious. But the handwriting betrayed her. Scott dropped the notebook on the floor. He looked at me and said he had no idea she built entire strategies around people's lives. He left without waiting for a response. His footsteps echoed down the hallway until the building swallowed the sound. Brianna sank onto the carpet and held her face in her hands. Not because she regretted anything, because everything was collapsing at once. I looked around the apartment, realizing nothing inside it belonged to a person I actually knew. The truth surfaced completely now, and the consequences were about to follow. I didn't stay in the apartment after Scott left the notebook. I stepped outside because the walls felt tight and humid. Standing in the hallway gave me the space to breathe. Everything she hid had surfaced. Every story she engineered cracked open at once. There was nothing left for her to manipulate. Nothing left for her to rearrange. Nothing left for her to use as a script. I walked out of the building, ignoring Brianna calling my name from inside the apartment. She sounded desperate, not remorseful, not confused. Desperate, like someone losing the last hand in a game she believed she had already mastered. I drove away with no clear destination. I ended up at a gas station on the edge of town, sitting in my car while the neon signs hummed above me. The night air carried a faint smell of exhaust and cold pavement. I turned my phone to silent and let it sit face down on the passenger seat. Messages kept arriving in bursts like electrical pulses, lighting up the screen again and again. When the sky began to lighten, I returned to the apartment only long enough to gather the essentials. I didn't want to give her another chance to twist anything. I moved quickly through each room. I packed clothes, documents, my laptop, a few personal belongings, and left the furniture untouched. When she emerged from the bedroom doorway, her face carried that brittle defiance she used when she felt cornered. She started talking, not apologizing, explaining. She kept insisting her intentions weren't malicious, that she never wanted an outcome like this. She said she had been overwhelmed with debt, with pressure, with uncertainty about her future. She blamed the loan she took from Carl. She blamed the job she wanted but never got. She blamed her upbringing. She blamed my work schedule. She blamed timing, circumstances, fear. I didn't argue because none of it mattered. Every justification she threw into the air only confirmed how much she expected others to carry the fallout of her decisions. When she realized I wasn't engaging, her voice cracked. She asked what she was supposed to do now. She asked if there was a path where we could fix things. She asked how long I planned to stay away. The questions kept coming without pauses, fired from a place of panic rather than hope. I told her I was leaving permanently. Her breath hitched like she hadn't considered that possibility. She stepped in front of the doorway, blocking me for a moment. I moved past her without raising my voice or changing my speed. She grabbed my arm, and I shook her hand off gently but firmly. She didn't follow me after that. She knew the line had finally been crossed in a way she couldn't rewrite. I drove straight to the leasing office. Mira sat behind the counter, sipping coffee from a stainless steel mug. When she saw me walk in with a folder of documents tucked under my arm, her expression shifted into something serious. I told her I was officially requesting removal from the lease. She walked me through the paperwork, scanned the file, and compared Brianna's stated income against the verification she forged. She said the falsified employment letter violated housing policy and would trigger a reassessment. The lease could not remain active under its current terms. If Brianna wanted to stay, she would need to provide accurate documents showing she could afford the rent alone. If not, the property management team would begin eviction procedures. I didn't take satisfaction from that information. It wasn't revenge. It was simply reality moving into place. After leaving the leasing office, I checked into a hotel. A quiet one near the old industrial district where no one I knew would pass by accident. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh carpet adhesive. The room had one window overlooking a loading dock. It wasn't comfortable, but it was neutral, and neutrality was exactly what I needed. By late afternoon, Brianna's messages shifted tone. Panic replaced anger. Confusion replaced demands. She asked if I was serious about leaving. She asked if we could meet to talk. She asked if I would at least hear her out. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Out of self-preservation. The more distance I put between us, the clearer everything became. 2 days passed before the next twist arrived. I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. The man on the line introduced himself as part of the property management team. He said they reviewed the documents and confirmed the falsification. Brianna's updated income could not support the lease. She failed to provide adequate proof. They had issued a notice requiring her to vacate within a set window unless someone else took responsibility for the contract. He asked if I intended to return to the lease. I told him no. He said he understood and wished me well. When the call ended, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed staring at the muted television. The situation wasn't dramatic. It wasn't theatrical. It was simply the aftermath of someone who built an entire life on convenience and assumed the ground beneath her would always hold. The next day, another unexpected message arrived from Scott. He apologized again. He said he had blocked Brianna fully. He said he didn't want any part of her plans. He said he hoped I found stability after everything. His tone was quiet and raw, nothing like the man I saw on my couch the first night. He had been deceived too, manipulated in a different direction, used as the second pillar in her rotating support structure. That didn't excuse him, but it clarified him. What surprised me wasn't the apology. It was how quickly he cut ties after seeing the notebook. He recognized something I hadn't fully processed yet. Brianna didn't operate through impulse. She operated through preparation. She built bridges to every possible outcome and stepped across whichever one benefited her most at the moment. Removing myself stopped being a choice and became a necessity. By the end of the week, Brianna's meltdown escalated into something public. She tried showing up at my job, shouting in the lobby and demanding to see me. Security escorted her out. My boss pulled me aside later and asked if everything was safe at home. I told him I wasn't living there anymore. He didn't press. That night, she sent one final message. Not long, not emotional, just a single admission that sliced through the noise. She said she never believed I would leave. She thought I would tolerate anything because I was steady, predictable, comfortable to fall back on if her other plans collapsed. Reading that line didn't hurt. It clarified everything that happened before it. I wasn't leaving because she cheated. I wasn't leaving because she lied. I was leaving because she built me into a safety net instead of a partner. I stayed in the hotel for another week before finding an apartment across town. Smaller, but peaceful. Uncomplicated. Free from hidden debts, secret lovers, and fabricated futures. Meanwhile, Brianna moved into her mother's crowded townhouse. Her job placed her on probation for bringing personal disputes into the workplace. Carl demanded repayment. Scott ghosted her completely. Her family, once convinced I was the villain, slowly pieced together the truth after the courtyard recording leaked through relatives. Every pillar she relied on dissolved. Life didn't punish her dramatically. It simply stopped cushioning her choices. I didn't reach out. I didn't follow her progress. I didn't look for updates. I didn't need closure from her anymore. The story ended the moment her blueprint for the future collapsed. I stepped into my own life again, one where I wasn't a character in someone else's strategic plan. And that was enough.